Dead by Daylight is the Hall of Fame of horror. Nobody is contesting this, and oftentimes the game is compared to Fortnite with how many different names and licenses it has within it. Freddy Krueger, Chucky, Ghostface, Resident Evil twice, in fact, with both Albert Wesker and the Nemesis. Every killer in this game is given a set of 20 add-ons that change gameplay for that killer, from both minor number increases to add-ons that change the way the character is played completely. Each add-on is referential to the character's story, their lore, or where they come from, or even just an Easter egg from their games. Seeing as I'm a pretty big Resident Evil fan because of Dead by Daylight, as well as the #1 Nemesis player in the world, I want to talk about all of the add-ons that came with both Resident Evil chapters, the Nemesis on June 15th, 2021, and Albert Wesker, the Mastermind, the following year on August 30th, 2022. Nemesis's add-ons mainly come from references to the remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3, the two main Raccoon City-centered games at the time, while Wesker's add-ons come from all over the franchise, with some from Resident Evil 1, some from RE5, and even some from Resident Evil Outbreak. And his plethora of games that they're pulled from even give you the idea that Wesker was, as he is, a guiding hand behind the scenes in most of the problems in the Resident Evil universe, which is cool. So let's start off with the Nemesis's add-ons, because I'm the most familiar with them. Brian's Intestine is the small intestine of Police Chief Brian Irons. Chief Irons was a vile man, abusing his position as chief of police to get away with both being a serial killer and, even later on, advancing his hobby of taxidermy by taking it from animals to humans, with not every one of his victims being deceased before he started cutting into them. In both the original and remake version of Resident Evil 2, he dies on September 29th, 1998, during the Raccoon City destruction incident. And this add-on is indicative of him meeting his own, long-deserved end. The damaged syringe is not a direct reference to any one item in Resident Evil or any specific Resident Evil game, and is more indicative of how, in general, normal medical supplies and healthcare simply would not work against a virus like this. Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2 does have a syringe available during the flashback scenario, but this is not the specific one-to-one of Dead by Daylight's damaged syringe. The S.T.A.R.S Field Combat Manual is a single appearance purchasable from the in-game shop in Resident Evil 3's remake. All this does, in-game, is making it easier to perform dodges while you're holding it in your inventory. It is a journal edited by Chris Redfield to compile all of the S.T.A.R.S' information on close quarters combat. It ended up being a lot more helpful once the apocalypse started, believe me. Now, the Visitor Wristband is picked up by Leon Kennedy during RE2's remake to access the first level of doors within the nest towards the end of the game. It's simple in design, something you'd wear around your wrist as someone fresh to the facility, and in RE2, it must be upgraded to proceed onwards to any door that isn't open to non-staff. It is upgraded into a staff wristband later, and then into a senior staff wristband, but that's where the upgrades stop for Leon, as Ada is the one to activate the elevator at the end of the game for him, rather than having to do it himself. The admin wristband is the final upgrade of the previous visitor wristband, but while it would stop at being a senior staff wristband for Leon, if you play as Claire during the RE2 remake, she will have to upgrade her own wristband the entire way to being an admin wristband because Ada is not feeling too helpful to her specifically during her scenario. And then we have the Adrenaline Injector, which is an add-on that does not necessarily have a one-to-one iteration of an item or a collectible from the games, and is more so in line with Nemesis's killer instinct mechanic upon vaccinating in Dead by Daylight. There are a few things that the Adrenaline Injector could be likened to, such as Claire's Adrenaline Shot ability in RE-verse, or the extra life mechanic in RE7's Nightmare DLC being called Adrenaline. However, there is not specifically a syringe in Resident Evil, to my knowledge, directly called Adrenaline Injector. Marvin's blood is the life essence of Marvin Branagh, a police officer within the Raccoon Police Department. He is a main character in the RE2 remake and assists you during your attempts at conquering the police station, both as Leon and Claire. You're able to see how he gets infected when a zombified Brad Vickers, the pilot of S.T.A.R.S, bites him due to his hesitation to shoot him, due to mistaking a zombified groan for a sign that the man he once knew was still inside the shambling corpse in front of him. Marvin eventually dies in the station, covered in blood. Marvin's blood. Mikhail's eye is the remaining lone eyeball of Mikhail Victor, the leader of the UBCS, the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, mercenaries hired by Umbrella to help contain outbreaks. In Resident Evil 3, more specifically the remake, when the Nemesis moves to intercept Jill during the evacuation for the city, Mikhail makes the sacrificial play and blows himself up in an attempt to stop the Nemesis. In both versions of the game, both the original and the remake, Nemesis survives and continues to hunt down Jill, while what's left of Mikhail, his eye and viscera, is spread across the train tunnels of Raccoon City. Zombie hearts are not a direct reference to any one thing in the Resident Evil games, though there are many hearts referenced in puzzles, like those in the recent Resident Evil 9 Requiem. A zombie heart is cold, unbeating, and does not allow for blood flow in the common infected zombie of the series, while it teems with viruses. And you'll see plenty of those by the time that you make it through an outbreak. The Licker Tongue is the prehensile tongue of the Licker, a terrifying foe in the Resident Evil universe that is completely blind and reacts only to sounds of survivors that move too quickly throughout their environments, which forces you to slow down. The add-on sort of does the same thing that the actual enemy type does, with it hindering you upon being struck by the Nemesis tentacle. The Licker has appeared in more games and movies than I can talk about individually, but the main one that inspired this add-on would be the RE2 and RE3 remakes. The plant 43 vines come from the RE2 remake, as in the original game referred to it more simply as the Ivy. Plant 42 was a boss in the original Resident Evil, while Plant 43 is, of course, the result of more Umbrella meddling with things that they shouldn't be. It was monitored by Umbrella and had its growth limited while they researched it, up until the T-virus was leaked into the facility, where it then grew at a rapid pace in Nest's greenhouse, where both Leon and Claire had to go through in order to escape it. The add-on is a pretty good representation of how much of a pain in the ass it was to get through these sections, as it makes it significantly more inconvenient to collect vaccines from the crates. The Serotonin Injector is actually a pretty deep cut as to where it comes from, going all the way back to Resident Evil Survivor, a light gun game from the year 2000. Beta-heteronon-serotonin is a fictional hormone that comes from pituitary glands from individuals between the ages of 16 and 20 when the individual is under extreme stress, notably, by Umbrella standards, cutting into the subject's skull without anesthesia. This hormone is used to make Tyrants significantly more ferocious, taking immense quantities of the hormone to create the Hypnos T-type from the aforementioned RE Survivor. As far as it being an injector, that's just a classic Resident Evil thing. Now, for the T-virus sample, this is the thing that caused the Raccoon City incident. While it alone could be its own video on how the actual incident happened, the quick and dirty of it is that William Birkin was planning on defecting from Umbrella with his research. However, Umbrella caught wind of this and sent in the USS, the Umbrella Security Service, to stop him. Upon confronting Birkin, who tried to defend himself, he was mortally wounded by Hunk and another USS member. Birkin then injected himself with the G virus while the USS was taking his briefcase. Upon mutating and chasing down Alpha Team of the USS, Birkin broke the briefcase containing the G and T virus samples in the sewers, which was then sampled upon by the local rats, infecting them, and they eventually went on to infect Victory Lake, which is where the majority of Raccoon City's drinking water came from. This sample could also be the one that Ada was trying to recover. The Tyrant Gore is the freshly exploded viscera of a Type 002 Tyrant that died in combat, with signs of severe burns via the flavor text. This one comes directly from Resident Evil 1, where you have to fight the Tyrant on the rooftop before you can finally escape the Spencer mansion, blowing up said Tyrant with a rocket launcher after Wesker finally admitted his betrayal earlier on and released it to eliminate you. This is not to be confused with the Tyrant that Leon blew up at the end of RE2. That's Mr. X, the T-00, which is also not to be confused with the Nemesis, who is a T-103 with an any alpha parasite. The Tyrant naming schemes gets a little complex, but yeah. And speaking of the any alpha parasite, this is the very thing that makes Nemesis Nemesis. The Umbrella Tyrants, for lack of a better explanation, they were sort of robotic. They could listen to orders and do what they were told. The Parasite, the any alpha, acts as a sort of second brain for the T-103 Tyrant, giving it the ability to actually think, like planning, tactics, using weaponry, etc. The Nemesis is seen most notably in Resident Evil 3, obviously, and the project for the Nemesis was inspired by a parasite, Las Plagas, from Resident Evil 4. Then we have the broken recovery coin. This is a direct reference to Resident Evil 3 Remake's recovery coin, which heals you while it's in your inventory. Just over time is a helpful little heal. This add-on, quite simply, is one of those snapped in half, and it makes it harder as a team in Dead by Daylight to vaccinate yourselves against the T-virus because there's simply one less vaccine in the trial. It is thematically a pretty good add-on in relation to Resident Evil, just it's not actually very good to use as the Nemesis because it kind of just happens and then it's done. Ink ribbons are used in the Resident Evil games so that you can save at the iconic series typewriters. There would be a set amount in each game, as they weren't a drop from enemies. You would have a limited amount of save states in the game, leading towards that old school game difficulty, comparing it more to more modern versions that have infinite saves that you could use at any point in time, with Resident Evil 4, the original one, being the game that did away with the ink ribbon system entirely, and RE9 bringing it back with both findable and craftable ink ribbons to save. Jill's Sandwich. This one is a direct reference to the iconic line from the original Resident Evil 1 in 1996.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
After Jill is saved from being crushed by a descending ceiling trap by fellow S.T.A.R.S member Barry Burton, he says this. It's been a long-running gag, with plenty of fan art and friendly nods to it, now even 30 years later, Jesus. The add-on itself even has fun flavor, text, saying that it was tragically squished. The Iridescent Umbrella Badge is a Dead by Daylight specific token that's meant to represent the killer themselves, be it where they're from, who they are, or what's important to them especially. And this one, a badge of Umbrella, was molded out of fog itself into glass by the entity. Nemesis's token, the Iridescent Umbrella Badge, is representative of a corporation that pushed far beyond ethical and humane science. And yeah, that's kind of Umbrella's entire thing. They are one of the most well-known big, evil fictional corporations, like Weyland-Yutani from the Alien Predator universe. And then our final add-on for the Nemesis in Dead by Daylight is the Shattered Stars badge, an icon that held hope for those in Raccoon City, finally destroyed by the Nemesis. Nemesis's entire goal, his entire being, his entire meaning for existence is to eliminate stars, as he was sent into Raccoon City during the outbreak to tie up loose ends. Those loose ends being Brad Vickers and Jill Valentine. An unshattered version of the badge shows up in the RE2 remake in both Claire and Leon's campaigns as a key item required to get into the armory to retrieve a powerful weapon. The Lightning Hawk for Leon and the MQ-11 for Claire. And that covers all of the Nemesis' add-ons, but then we have to talk about the other half of the Resident Evil chapters in Dead by Daylight. With Albert Wesker, or as he's called in DBD, the Mastermind, he was an esteemed researcher behind the scenes at Umbrella, working on the T-virus before he started a career in the United States Army, eventually leading S.T.A.R.S as its captain, prior to betraying them during the Mansion incident, of course. And during said incident, Wesker infected himself with T-virus, giving himself regenerative abilities that saved his life after he was impaled by the previously mentioned T-002 Tyrant. He would be behind the scenes for Resident Evil 4 and make his return in Resident Evil 5 as the main villain, infected with a new virus, Uroboros. A virus that works as a lottery system. If you are found incompatible, your genes will turn into a writhing mass of tentacles. But if you, like Wesker, were found compatible, you would gain superhuman strength, speed, regeneration, and even shapeshifting. Wesker planned to wipe out billions by releasing Uroboros, and was stopped in Resident Evil 5 by Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar. In Dead by Daylight, Wesker has many references to the games that he's in, with some being actual items, like his own version of the first aid spray to cleanse the virus that he can afflict survivors with, and others being references to parts of the lore that he's in. So let's get right into Albert Wesker's add-ons and where they come from. The Jewel Beetle is not so much something of importance to Albert Wesker himself, but something from the game that he shows up in, Resident Evil 5. This Jewel Beetle is a small collectible treasure item that you can pick up as Chris or Sheva and sell for 2,000 Nigerian Naira, though the game just calls the currency gold. And then his R.P.D. shoulder walkie is from Albert Wesker's attire when he worked as a member of S.T.A.R.S, as its own description states. Without the ability to communicate, the cops of Raccoon City are isolated and don't stand a chance. There's not an in-game iteration of this to pick up as a key item or anything of the like, but Wesker is shown to be wearing it during RE0 and RE1, and even in his S.T.A.R.S outfit for Dead by Daylight. The Unicorn Medallion comes from the Resident Evil 2 remake, and was called the Unicorn Medal in the original Resident Evil 2. In both games, it is a key item used to unlock the statue in the middle of the station in order to progress the mainline story. While not technically directly related to Wesker, he did actively work at this station, and this is why he received it as an add-on. And then we have the Uroboros Tendril. This is Albert Wesker's power, his ultimate virus, the one that gave him the superhuman strength and speeds that he uses while fighting against Chris and Sheva in RE5. In Dead by Daylight, Wesker uses the Uroboros to fling himself around the map for traversal, as well as it being his main power and infection mechanic in-game. The Bullhorn is another reference from Resident Evil 5 that I genuinely wouldn't have found myself while writing this if I didn't ask my friend, so thank you, Poyo. This add-on comes from the cutscene in RE5 right before the Executioner boss, where there is a crowd barker yelling through a bullhorn at the ecstatic onlookers waiting for the execution of Sheva's inside man, the guy that gave you your starting gear early on in the game. Then there's the Gold Chalice. This is another treasure item found in Resident Evil 5 by Chris and Sheva and can be sold for 3,000 Nigerian Naira. This specific Gold Chalice is found in the room right before the Jill and Wesker fight. RE5 has plenty of other non-gold chalices in the game too, so this add-on in particular, being made out of gold, was chosen with purpose. Then we have his leather gloves. These are worn by Albert Wesker during his appearance in RE5 in his trench coat look, something that he wears in every single appearance he makes in Resident Evil games, aside from the RE4 remake, where he has his bare hands out. I promise I'm not making this like a whole thing, but it is an interesting design choice to me when he literally has had his hands gloved since 1996 in some way, shape, or form, and then RE4, he doesn't. I don't even care about this. It was just like a super weird thing that I noticed. Like, why are they doing this now, you know? Even in spin-off games, like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, until 2023 with RE4 Remake, and he doesn't have the gloves anymore. I don't know. The Lion Medallion, similar to the Unicorn Medallion, is a key item in the Resident Evil 2 remake, though this one does not have a direct original Resident Evil 2 counterpart, unlike the Unicorn and the Unicorn Medal. It too must be used to open the statue in the middle of the R.P.D, so that you can continue your quests downwards into the sewers so that you can escape from the Raccoon City Police Department. The loose crank is a reference to much of the Resident Evil franchise, with iterations of some form of crank showing up in plenty of the games. There's the square crank in both RE2 and RE3, the checkpoint crank in RE4. It's just a notable theme in the games. This crank, however, is most likely referencing the ones from RE5, seeing as how Wesker is a much larger main antagonist of the game. You come across gates and you have to crank them open. This add-on is continuing the Resident Evil crank meta. Now, the gold egg is an egg laid by a chicken that also happens to be made out of gold. The egg, not the chicken. They're incredibly hard to find, and they show up in RE4, RE5, and RE4 Remake, where they're either able to be sold for incredible amounts of money, thrown at enemies, or restore your health completely, giving you plenty of options when you acquire such an egg. Chris.
You will give me an egg!
Then we have the Maiden Medallion, along with the other Lion and Unicorn Medallions, which is a key item in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Once you have all three of these, you can open the central statue in the Raccoon Police Station's main hall and head into the sewers. Awesome. The portable safe in the RE2 remake is a puzzle that you must solve by pressing the order so that all the lights on it light up in the correct counterclockwise order. It is randomized between playthroughs and must be solved in order to acquire the spare key to the safety deposit room. Then we have an icon of Resident Evil, the red herb. This is a center point of healing in Resident Evil and acts as a combination piece to green herbs to increase their potency, while it does nothing on its own. They've been in Resident Evil since the very first game. And then our next add-on, the video conference device, is one that is used by Albert Wesker to contact Ada Wong during both Resident Evil 4 and Umbrella Chronicles, and is basically used as an incredibly early version of Skype or Zoom or Discord, take your pick. Wesker uses the video conference device to check in on Ada during RE4 when talking about the retrieval of the Amber, and when she makes reports to him during the Umbrella Chronicles. He doesn't really enjoy the ease of text and has to FaceTime you for updates, I suppose. The dark sunglasses are Wesker's iconic look. He's had them since 1996 and has kept them into the modern era. There isn't necessarily a lore reason at first for him to have these apart from being a cool guy villain from the 90s, but after the mansion incident and his eyes taking on their cat-like appearance, it would make much more sense to hide them from a wandering gaze. Or maybe he just listens to Corey Hart. And when he's stunned by a paladin dead by daylight, and his sunglasses fall off, he takes another pair from his coat. It's a detail that I can appreciate, because it's small, but it's funny. And if you specifically want to pick up a pair of sunglasses that are most similar to Wesker's, I'd recommend, not sponsored by the way, the Ray-Ban RB 4034s if you want his RE1 classic glasses look, or the Police brand 38093 568 sunglasses for his RE5 look. Unfortunately, the 568s are no longer sold, so you will have to get a set secondhand. The green herb is a cornerstone item in all of gaming in its entirety. This is up there with a red barrel exploding when you shoot it. The green herb in Resident Evil is an item that you eat to heal for a little bit, or you can combine it with other herbs to have different effects. With a significant number of crafting recipes over the years, it has remained a mainstay in the series in both the idea that green equals healthy and in Resident Evil Sandbox since 1996. The helicopter stick references part of Wesker's original plan from Resident Evil 1 and 0. He sabotaged Bravo Team's helicopter on July 23rd, the team led by Enrico Marini and consisting of Rebecca Chambers, Richard Eichen, Kenneth J. Sullivan, Forrest Speyer, Edward Dewey, and Kevin Dooley, so that they would crash and require the assistance of Alpha Team, which was, of course, led by Albert Wesker and consisting of Chris Redfield, Jill Ballantyne, Barry Burton, Brad Vickers, and Joseph Frost. Wesker and S.T.A.R.S would fly out toward the Spencer Mansion in the Arclay Mountains, and Bravo Team's helicopter going down starts the entire story of Resident Evil 1, and the story overall. Then, the Uroboros virus, not to be confused with the Uroboros Tendril add-on from earlier, is the injection that would permit someone to take the ultimate gamble on whether or not their genes would respond to the virus. Wesker infects Excelligione with the virus after feeling she had reached the peak of her usefulness, turning her into a massive worm monster when she loses her gamble. This act preceding his own later boss fight with Chris and Sheva, where he was actually able to have his genes augmented in a non-horrendous turn-into-a-worm effect. The iridescent Uroboros vial is the pinnacle of Albert Wesker's research. Its own description describes it best as the perfect bioweapon, with decades of research leading to this. Uroboros was enough of a deadly virus that it would have been a world ender if he had not been stopped. This add-on, made by the Fog's entity for Wesker, knew that this was his crowning achievement. The mere completion of it meant an immense deal to him, with the goal of infecting the entire world through complete global saturation. And then, the lab photo is our final add-on for Albert Wesker. It's a picture of all of the researchers of the Bioorganic Weapons Research Group at Umbrella, a direct recreation of a collectible photo that you can find. As the senior researcher of the T-Virus, Wesker is both directly and indirectly responsible for the Nemesis coming into being. Wesker was hired by Umbrella in 1977 and graduated in 1978 alongside Dr. William Birkin, with the two being transferred to the Arclay laboratory, where the two of them successfully implanted Ebola into an existing strain of T-Virus to make it more zombie-making instead of simply a killer virus. Later came the Tyrant project, the Nemesis Alpha Parasite, the G-Virus, and Wesker's departure from Umbrella once the Tyrant project slowed in progress. Despite the add-on itself being from Resident Evil 1, the description of it, the quote,
"Only a handful of humans truly matter. Everyone else is just so much chaff. So now, I have to separate this chaff from the wheat."
that quote is actually from Resident Evil 5, so it's a little bit of a mix of the beginning of Wesker's story and the end of it. And that's it for all of the Resident Evil add-ons in Dead by Daylight. From the Nemesis to the mastermind behind the partial creation of the Nemesis, Albert Wesker, these chapters were made with a good deal of care as far as the add-on visual design and choices for what they are go, and are full of fun references for those that enjoy the series that they come from, Resident Evil, instead of just playing them in Dead by Daylight, like how I started with Nemesis. This has been Horse. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching my stuff. Hope you had a good one. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if this does well, maybe I'll make it a series. So let me know what you want to see next. If you want to learn the lore tidbits of other killers or something. I don't know. So yeah, see you later. Catch you in the next one. Bye.